Excellencies, distinguished participants, good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the Asia-Pacific Regional Food Systems Dialogue. We will begin shortly. Distinguished participants, while we wait for all speakers and panelists to get connected, we thought that this would be a good opportunity to receive some feedback from participants. We have prepared a very short survey and we look forward to your inputs. We would like to ask you to please open Menti on the link that is being provided in the chat box and to respond to 2 brief questions. And I just get a quick signal once the link is up. Our first question is, how optimistic are you that our region will achieve an equitable and sustainable food systems transformation for all people? And we ask you to respond to this question on a scale from 1, which is least optimistic, to 6, most optimistic. And I would like to ask you to log your responses now. We are still waiting. We have a couple of additional minutes.
Recording in progress.
We see that most of you are pretty optimistic for the region. Indeed, up to very optimistic. Let's just give this a couple of additional minutes. I see responses still coming in. Just a couple of additional seconds. So if you would still like to contribute to this survey, please log your response now. And thank you very much. I don't think we are, oh, we are still receiving some additional responses. Okay, I would like to close this survey now. We have a very clear preference. Most of our participants are either highly or leaning towards the optimistic. That's a great outcome. Then let's move to the next question, which is, where do you see the greatest opportunity for change for Asian Pacific food systems? Can I please ask for the next link to be posted? And can I please ask for the current bar chart to be taken down? Where do you see the greatest opportunity for change for Asian Pacific food systems? You would need to use the second link that was provided. And you can log up to 3 responses. Please give your answers now. This seems to be a little bit more difficult than the previous question. There we see the words coming up. We see advocacy, commitment, action, food fortification and healthy diets, sustainability, policies, affordability, structural transformation and consumer demand. Inclusiveness has come up, and advocacy. Marine-based food systems. Urban agriculture has come up. Value addition and global importance. But what remains clearly in the focus and in the center are policies, sustainability, and advocacy. Diversity has also come up, and gender equity, public demand. But again, what remains in focus is advocacy, sustainability, and agriculture. And with this, I think we can close this quick survey. We're getting to the start of our food systems dialogue. And I would now like to ask our colleagues to take the survey off and return the screen. Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished speakers, participants, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the Asia-Pacific Regional Food Systems Dialogue. We have speakers and participants connected from across the region and beyond, and we look forward to an engaging dialogue. At the outset, I am pleased to invite Ms. Armida Sarcia Aliciabana, Under-Secretary General of the United Nations and Executive Secretary of ESCAP, to deliver her welcome remarks. Dr. Aliciabana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Katinka. Very good afternoon. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, delegates, ladies and gentlemen. My colleague, Mr. Jong-Jin Kim, Assistant Director General and Regional Representative of FAO, Ms. Agnes Kalibata, UN Secretary General Special Envoy to the UN Food System Summit. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Asia-Pacific Regional Food Systems Dialogue. We are pleased to co-organize this dialogue with the regional offices of the Food and Agriculture Organization, the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, the United Nations Environment Programme, the World Food Programme, and the World Health Organization. I also welcome the participation of the national conveners who will share the strategies of their countries. The COVID-19 pandemic and climate change remain the most critical threat to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. Many countries have experienced new challenges to their food security. The FAO Food Price Index has been rising over the past months, causing disruption in agricultural operations in the region. Moreover, the restricted movements of food supplies made it challenging for producers to sell perishable produce, raise financial losses to farmers, and jeopardize the nutrition security of consumers. The Secretary General has noted that the pandemic has highlighted the fragility of our food systems. Small farmers, fishers, and rural workers are among the population most at risk during this crisis. We need to safeguard food value chain, prevent future breakdowns, and ensure food security for all. There is a need to improve operations and livelihoods of small producers, informal workers, and SMEs across sectors that can ensure production of and access to food and other essential goods and services. As of 2020, the number of people in the region facing acute food insecurity nearly doubled to about 265 million. Governments have an important role to play in the development of new pathways for food systems. Our region is not only the most populous and home to the largest number of smallholder farmers, but its smallholder produce most of the world's food. The steady depletion of water resources, deterioration of soil quality, inadequate logistics, and inefficient farming practices and land usage are factors for the lower yields compared to most other regions. We need to act urgently so that our policy measures can make a difference in the lives of our citizens. I would like to take this opportunity to highlight 3 policy priorities for your further consideration and deliberation. First, to focus on scaling up the digital agriculture market. The market is projected to witness significant growth in the region. Labor shortages and supply chain disruptions are expected to raise the need for digital agriculture while leveraging new and emerging technologies. I recognize that member states have increased farm mechanization and the development of digital agriculture infrastructure by adopting innovative technologies for farmers. Sustainable agriculture mechanization not only enhances productivity and facilitates the processing of food, but also has a high innovation potential through ICT-enabled mechanization and post-harvest mechanization. These tools are essential to facilitate recovery from crisis and building the long-term resilience of farmers, especially for smallholder farmers. Second, to focus on restoring the health of agroecological system. Strategies must also be undertaken to address zoonosis and the links between the wildlife trade, food system, and health in reducing the risk of future pandemics. Improving essential food and nutrition services will also allow us to focus on infant and young children, women, and particularly vulnerable population. Third, we must strengthen regional cooperation to achieve the improvement of how we produce, process, and consume food. ESCAP, along with stakeholders, is working to facilitate integrated policy making to achieve sustainable food system, biodiversity, and ecosystem health. Our focus has been on reducing food loss resulting from international trade in the region, including through food safety and quality control strategies, which will facilitate cross-border trade. Time has now come to strengthen our work with member states and move beyond our business as usual scenario. At the regional level, ESCAP is engaged in supporting food systems through the modernization of the agricultural sector with the work of one of its regional institutions, the Center for Sustainable Agriculture Mechanization, or better known as CSAM. We are fully committed to working with the regional and sub-regional framework to recover better and transform the food systems in the region. I'm pleased to inform you that we will convey your valuable recommendations through the summit convened by United Nations Secretary General later this year. I wish you a very successful dialogue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Alicia Bana, for these very warm welcome words. And I would now like to invite Mr. Jongjin Kim, Assistant Director General and FAO Regional Representative for Asia and the Pacific. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Katinka. Ms. Agnes Kalibata, the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy to the UN Food System Summit. Ms. Amida Saisia Alijava Bana, UN Undersecretary General and the Executive Secretary of the ESCAP, and the regional directors of the sister UN agencies, delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me a great pleasure to speak at the opening of the Asia Pacific Regional Food System Dialogue. In 2019, when the UN Secretary General called for Food System Summit to be held in 2021, anyone could not know that the global tragedy was about to unfold and would leave no country untouched. The damage inflicted by the COVID-19 pandemic on the world's economy has brought us to a point where food and food systems now have to be at the center of the global development agenda. The Food System Summit is more important than ever. The Asia Pacific region needs to have a major say at the Food System Summit for two most obvious reasons. It is most heavily and the most densely populated region of the world, and it is the engine of the global economy. The impacts of the pandemic are so severe in this region that they threaten to undo the progress of the accelerated economic growth that we had experienced during the past couple of decades. In fact, those impacts continue to be felt, and they are pushing us further off track with respect to achieving the SDGs. One of my own important tasks each year is to guide the preparation of the launch of our flagship annual report on the state food and security and nutrition. It's a co-published annually by FAO and 3 other UN agencies, UNICEF, WFP, and the WHO. And one of the main takeaway messages that report has generated year on year is that the incidence of malnutrition in this region has remained stubbornly high. Roughly half of the world's malnutrition population, which is some 350 million people, live here in Asia and the Pacific region. Approximately 75 million children under 5 years of age are stunted, and more than 31 million are wasted. Meanwhile, almost counterintuitively, childhood obesity is gradually rising. So while we've been fighting all of that, we now face a new battle to overcome the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. The outcome of this pandemic could result in additional 140 million people forced into extreme poverty, and the doubling of the number of people facing acute food insecurity to 265 million. The multiple burden of malnutrition in the region are the result of our inability to direct our food systems to provide sufficient nutritious food to citizens. Even before the pandemic engulfed the region, it was facing a number of challenges to food and agriculture, including, among others, natural hazards such as floods, droughts, earthquakes, cyclones, climate change, rapid urbanization and land degradation, scarcity in natural resources such as water, transboundary pests and diseases such as desert locust, fall armyworm, and African swine fever. Therefore, the Asia Pacific region is ripe for food system transformation, and it is high on the agenda of the governments in the Asia Pacific region. The very diverse. Some countries have an aging population, while others have big youth population. There are countries which are highly developed, and there are those that are developing fast. Low, middle, and high-income countries, as well as those which are food insecure. Let me say this very clearly. We have challenges, sure, but we also have our strengths to draw upon from each other. There are plenty and a variety of solutions that are available, which are policy-based, evidence-based, regenerative, innovative, and technological. Many of these are needed to overcome a diversity of challenges. We are a resourceful people. We have thousands of years of agriculture-based systems and hundreds of generations of know-how handed down to us. We have science. We have knowledge sharing. This is what we are here to do. In many ways, it's what FAO does best. And it's what we want to do more of. We want to learn. We want to share. I look forward to hearing from the distinguished conveners of National Food System Dialogues who are leading the process in the very challenging conditions. I have no doubt that the recent waves of COVID-19 pandemic have seriously impacted your work, but you and your teams are preserving this persevering situation to ensure that the dialogues are completed. I also look forward to hearing from representatives of all the stakeholders, the private sector, civil society, farmers group, consumer organization, and development partners. To all those who are watching and listening, I urge you to contribute to the discussion. Every voice must be heard and recorded. We know that UN Food System Summit is the beginning of the process, and only a coalition of us all can succeed. I hope this dialogue and all the national independent dialogues that have taken place in this vibrant region of ours will lead to Asia-Pacific pathway for sustainable food systems, and will be a concrete contribution to the pre-summit in Rome in July and the summit itself. COVID-19 has shocked and wounded food system, but we have the opportunity to build back better and healthier, even as we support those who have borne the brunt. But as we do so, let's be sure to get it right this time. Thank you very much. Over to Katinka.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kim, for these words. And I now have the honor to invite Dr. Agnes Kalibata, UN Secretary General Special Envoy to the 2021 Food Systems, to deliver a special address. Dr. Kalibata, please.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I want to thank the Executive Secretary General of ESCAP for the invitation to be part of the Asian Pacific Regional Dialogues. And I want to thank the UN agencies, World Food Programme, United Nations Environmental Programme, and the World Health Organization for being part of organizing this dialogue and supporting us. So we are extremely grateful for the support we've gotten in these dialogues, but also in getting this summit off the ground. The Secretary General launched this UN Food System Summit in 2019 with a recognition that the summit is an opportunity for us to address the challenges of coming through on SDGs, recognizing that we are behind and we have only 1 decade to go. But he also wanted to recognize that there are solutions to our food system that can help us really focus on issues of food security, health and nutrition, nature positive production systems, equity, resilience, and sustainability. He also recognized fully well that the Food Systems Summit provides an opportunity for us to build back better from the COVID-19 pandemic. So this dialogue that is being organized in the context of a regional dialogue for the Asian Pacific region is very timely. We've initiated dialogues, and I'm sure David will be talking about it shortly, across the world, mostly to ensure that we give an opportunity to member states, but also an opportunity to individuals, constituencies, communities, to think through their contexts, the local context they live in, recognizing fully well that no region of the world is similar to any other region of the world, and the cultures that define us also impact our food system. and being able to bring those things into our dialogues and being able to help them define how we go forward is extremely important. But going back to the regional dialogue here, the 53 member states that constitute the Asian Pacific region, like the Executive Secretary General said, and like you just said, Kim from FAO, have seen the most significant growth probably in the last 2 decades, have seen huge growth in terms of economic growth, but also have seen huge growth in terms of population growth, which both present different opportunities and different challenges. So the Food System Summit dialogues that we are going to have today is about addressing some of the opportunities that the Executive Secretary General highlighted, addressing some of the challenges that the FAO ADG has highlighted, but also then really understanding and taking advantage of the fact that this is a UN Food System Summit, where we are talking about how we as a globe move forward together, recognizing the opportunities and recognizing the challenges we sit amidst. See, one of the things we've learned through the UN Food System Summit is just how interconnected our world is, whether it is to do with how COVID-19 has moved from one country at a time and then across all our countries, whether it is how climate change is ravaging countries that don't even understand how climate change happens. Here in Africa, farmers that are trying to understand the meaning of climate change are most impacted by climate change. And I'm sure in Southeast Asia, these farmers are impacted as well. So it's good to see that people are already thinking about the kind of areas that need to be addressed, the kind of challenges that we need to address together. And the regional dialogue does provide an opportunity for us to talk together as a region, to understand the interconnectedness that we have as a region, but also to push that outside our region and understand how we fit in the world together and how we contribute to what's happening in the world and how we're impacted by what is happening in the world. So with that in mind and with an opportunity to focus on really some of the areas that are emerging in this Food System Summit, which include some of the key priorities that have been highlighted, which many of us have agreed around: the issue of ending hunger and nourishing people, the issue of reducing impact on climate change and biodiversity, the issue of building resilience, improving livelihoods and empowering communities, the issue of shifting to sustainable consumption patterns, and the issue and the opportunity of knowledge and innovation, as the Executive Secretary General has mentioned. These are all areas that we can dive deeper into and try to understand the implications of our region, but also bring out the character of how we want to take forward these areas in this region that we are having a dialogue around. So I thank you so much for mobilizing this dialogue, for getting us together to have these conversations. And I hope that as we move into the pre-summit, which is going to be happening on the 26th to 28th of July, that we bring a really concrete understanding of the national pathways and strategies that we'll be driving forward to ensure that our food systems can transform themselves or get transformed. And that as we move into the summit, which is in September, on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, that our heads of state can come forward with clear ambition and action around how we can transform our food systems for a better world. So I thank you all, and I look forward to being part of these conversations as we go into the pre-summit and the summit. So thank you again, and thank you for mobilizing this meeting. Over to you, moderator.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kalibata, for these encouraging words. Very well taken. And I would now like to invite the speech of His Excellency, Dr. Fed Fumfifak, Minister of Agriculture and Forestry of Lao PDR. May I please ask the organizers to play the video?
เฮียนบรรดาผู้ตั้งหนารัฐบาลที่นับถือเอกอัครราชทูตผู้มีเกียรติผู้ตั้งหนาคู่ร่วมพัฒนาฐานยิ่งฐานทรายข้าพเจ้ารู้สึกเป็นเกียรติที่ได้ตั้งหนาให้สปป.ลาวมีคำเห็นในกองประชุมระดับภาคพื้นอาซีแปซิฟิกเกี่ยวกับ ระบบเสบียงอาหารในมื้อนี้เพื่อเกียมให้กองซุ่มสุดยอดระบบเสบียงอาหารโลกในเดือนกันยาอยู่ที่นิวยอร์กกระทรวงเกษตรกรรมและป่าไม้สปป.ลาวได้จัดกองซุ่มระดับศาสตร์ในวันที่2มิถุนายนที่ผ่านมาเพื่อกำหนดทิศทางให้สปป.ลาวสามารถก้าวไปสู่มีระบบเสบียงอาหารที่ยืนยงโดยได้รับการสนับสนุนจากทีมงานสหประชาชาติประจำสปป.ลาวโดยมีผู้ตั้งหน้าจากบรรดากระทรวงแขนงการองค์การปกครองท้องถิ่นคู่ร่วมพัฒนาองค์การจัดตั้งสังคมองค์การจัดตั้งที่บ่สังกัดรัฐบาลและภาคส่วนเอกชนเข้าร่วมอย่างพร้อมเพรียงกองประชุมระดับศาสตร์แม่นบาดกล่าวที่สำคัญในการเปลี่ยนแปลงระบบเสบียงอาหารในสปป.ลาวและพวกเฮาหวังว่าจะสามารถต่อยอดผลสำเร็จของกองประชุมดังกล่าวเติมโดยอิงใส่แผนงานระดับโลกสำหรับสปป.ลาวพวกเฮาเน้นใส่4ของเขตหลักคือ 1. รับประกันเสบียงอาหารที่ปลอดภัยมีโภชนาการให้แก่ทุกคน 2. ส่งเสริมการผลิตให้เพียงพอแต่เป็นมิตรกับสิ่งแวดล้อม 3. สร้างและเปลี่ยนแปลงชีวิตการเป็นอยู่ของประชาชนให้ดีขึ้นและการแจกจ่ายผลประโยชน์ให้เท่าเทียมและ 4. สร้างความยืดหยุ่นต่อความเสี่ยงผลกระทบและความกดดันต่างๆนอกจากนั้นมี2ประเด็นที่สำคัญปรากฏเห็นในระหว่างกองประชุมระดับศาสตร์เซนประเด็นที่1ในคณะที่กำลังสนทนากันเกี่ยวกับ4หัวข้อหลักในมื้อนั้นพบว่าแต่ละหัวข้อแม่นล้วนแล้วแต่มีการเกาะไกลอย่างชัดเจนสามารถชี้ให้เห็นถึงการเฮ็ดเวียกร่วมกันและผลใดผลเสียระหว่างแต่ละหัวข้อและทั้งสามารถค้นพบจุดสมดุลระหว่างบุรมสิทธิ์ต่างๆประเด็นที่2กลุ่มที่มีความบอบบางต้องได้รับเผชิญกับความเสี่ยงที่ใหญ่ที่สุดในการได้รับผลกระทบทางลบจากระบบเสบียงอาหารที่บ่ยืนยงเช่นว่าแม่หญิงและเด็กน้อยข้าพเจ้าอยากขอเน้นอีกว่าระบบเสบียงอาหารของสปป.ลาวบ่แม่นระบบแบบโดดเดี่ยวและจำเป็นต้องได้ทำความเข้าใจบนพื้นฐานของความเสื่อมโยมกับเศรษฐกิจของภาคพื้นและของโลกรวมทั้งโอกาสและข้อจำกัดที่เกี่ยวของดังนั้นข้าพเจ้าจึงมีความคาดหวังเป็นอย่างสูงต่อกับกองประชุมในครั้งนี้และหวังว่าพวกเฮาจะสามารถสร้างความเข้มแข็งทางด้านคู่หัวมือในภาคพื้นและประกอบส่วนให้แก่การสร้างระบบเสบียงอาหารให้ยืนยงยิ่งขึ้นท้ายนี้ข้าพเจ้าขอขอบใจสำหรับบทบาทการประสานงานขององค์การสหประชาชาติและองค์การอาหารและการเกษตรในการสนทนาดังกล่าวและขออวยพรให้กองประชุมในมื้อนี้ประสบผลสำเร็จอย่างจบงามขอขอบใจ
Thank you so much for this intervention. Also, in fact, I would like to thank all of our speakers from the opening session for these very inspiring comments and for really setting the tone for the further dialogue. We're good in time. I hope that all of our panelists for the first panel are connected. I do see our moderator, that's great. So I would now like to invite our distinguished moderator for session 1, Dr. David Nabarro, who will moderate the first panel, Messages from the Countries, which will look to identify priority action areas to transform food systems in Asia and the Pacific. David Navarro is the senior advisor to the Food Systems Dialogues, and I'm sure that many of you have already engaged with him over the past months. So we're really very happy to have David here with us today. And over to you, David.
So Thank you very much indeed, Katinka, and really a huge gratitude to ESCAP and colleague organizations for organizing this wonderful regional session. As we just heard from Dr. Bet Pompipak of Lao PDR, it's great that we are seeing countries organizing dialogues in order to clarify their own strategic pathways to food systems of the future, the food systems needed by 2030. But also, it's great to see the emphasis on regional thought and action. And really, already, even in the first 4 presentations, it's quite clear that as the Food Systems Summit comes closer, 15 weeks away now, what we're seeing in more and more countries is a real emphasis on bringing together different stakeholders to explore existing strategies and mold them so that they can then help to provide the organizing framework for everybody moving forward to 2030. And what an exciting moment it is with each of the countries that are coming together here involved in a process of national dialogues, and each country at a slightly different stage. And right at the heart of this work are the nominated conveners, the people who have been appointed by national governments to lead the dialogue process in the run-up to the summit, and indeed, in many cases, to continue with that multi-stakeholder energy after the summit. And in the process of preparing for the summit, there is, first of all, a real emphasis on what's important for the country, but at the same time, there will be chances for actually aggregating national priorities, coming out with regional priorities, and then moving forward with coalitions that are coming together behind the specific actions being identified in the priorities. And so that's the direction of our discussion now. What are the emerging priorities that are coming into the national pathways to 2030? And what are the possibilities for collective action to really look at them from a regional perspective? And so our first convener who's going to present today is His Excellency Sok Silo, Secretary General for the Council for Agriculture and Rural Development in Cambodia. Sok Silo has been hard at work bringing together different stakeholders, building on work that's actually been done for some years in Cambodia. It's a country where multi-stakeholder working has settled in nicely, and also where the links between the food system and nutrition has actually been given a lot of attention. So I'd like to invite Sok Silo for his 3 minutes intervention to describe how are things looking with your dialogues in Cambodia right now, sir. You are moving towards the consolidation point. You're bringing together all the different ideas that came out through the exploration in stage 2. And what are the actions being identified as a priority in Cambodia that you would like to share with others? Over to you, sir.
Thank you, David. Thank you, the UN ESCAP and AHO for organizing this important regional dialogue. I would like to highlight the 3 main areas emerging from the dialogue. First, youth and social transformation in Cambodia food system. Cambodia has youthful population with 65% of population below the age of 30. The food system for today will belong to Cambodian youth tomorrow. Job creation and increased labor productivity in the local food system are critically important. Therefore, we are focusing heavily on engaging youth in dialogue, promoting education, training, innovation, and opportunity for youth. Second, healthy diet for all. Cambodia is home to diverse food system and well involved with nutritious food. However, poor households cannot afford this safe and nutritious food. We need to make this food more accessible for all and raise awareness about the benefit of the healthy diet during the critical 1,000-day window for mothers and children. Promoting diverse local food can be cope with food fortification, creating opportunity for the private and public sector to work together. Third, resilience. COVID-19 has highlighted the importance of strengthening system to withstand future shock and stress. In response, Cambodia has dramatically expanded the social assistance program, providing a basic for improved framework for social protection into the future. In general, we will continue to strengthen sustainable production system and local market infrastructure to ensure that perishable, nutrient-rich food are more widely available, accessible, safe, and in stable supply. This is in accordance with the commitment of the Royal Government of Cambodia to building a greener economy post-COVID-19. So our progress has been possible thanks to the alignment of national strategy and series of policy discussion that introduce food system concept before the food system summit dialogue commenced. And we have many lessons emerging from the discussion for what should be done. And as we proceed, we now need to focus on what will be done and who will do it, securing the smart commitment from the stakeholder, sufficient time and skill. Facilitation is required to balance differing point of view and ensure the dialogue are inclusive. For example, by placing consumer at the center of our work, some stakeholder will focus on the production food, or on nutrition, livelihood, or stewarding environment. So thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Well, I just want to say straight away to you, Excellency Soxilo, that was really fabulous, because I heard you very much stress that you've been looking at food systems in Cambodia for some time. And because I've worked with you over the years, I've watched this. And it means that it's not been difficult for you to encourage stakeholders as well as partners to join the government in a systems approach. Thank you for stressing that your focus is on localizing sustainable production where possible, and then for identifying these three areas where you're going to act. One is on shift to healthy diets, but really making sure that poorer communities can afford to do that. The second is on resilience, particularly given the vulnerabilities of people exposed by the COVID pandemic. And of course, we've discussed this, it's still going on in your country. And then the third is this absolute recognition by all of you that unless a positive effort is made to engage young people, the future is not strong. I like the fact that you stress the importance of inclusion. And I'm grateful to you for sharing how you're working in such an accessible way for everybody who's here. Thank you again, sir. I now like to shift to India. The dialogues in India are being convened by Professor Ramesh Chand, who's Member Secretary of Niti Aayog in India. I've actually been working with Professor Chan for a number of years, really, as we've seen in other countries, focusing on the interplay between what's in the different action tracks that are being advanced for the summit. And so, Professor Chand, if it's possible, we'd, I think, really value hearing from you. How are the Food Systems Summit dialogues exposing the shifts that need to take place in the food systems in India in the future? What are the really exciting and promising lessons that are emerging so far? Now, I hope that all is okay with the connection, Rameshji. So I'm now going to see whether you've got a chance. It's 3 minutes starting now.
Thank you, David, and good morning, good afternoon to friends from other Asia Pacific countries. David, as you mentioned in the beginning, we started work on food system sometime in the month of March this year. But I have observed is that the biggest contribution of this food system summit in India is that it is changing the thinking toward food. Earlier, there was a general view, there was a strong belief that whatever issue related to food system, whether it relates to production, whether it relates to nutrition, food security, vulnerability, etc., we can address it by focusing on individual components. But through food system, now it is being realized that we need to move away from commodity to system, activity to chain, actor to stakeholders, consumption to health, present generation to include present and future generations. So I just find that the biggest effect of food system dialogue is that it has accelerated this thinking. Initially, there was some thinking, but it was in small part. It was there with a few people. But now it is picking up. People are discussing it, that how we can bring this paradigm shift of dealing with the problem in silos to dealing with the problem in its entirety. The second change which I have observed is that very strong linkage and two-way linkage between food system and SDG goals. So we also spread this message that at least 12 SDG goals critically depends upon what we do in the food system. And it is not only that what happen in food system will influence SDG. Even when you achieve SDG, it is also affect food system. For example, climate change. It may not entirely happen because of agriculture. It happens because of other factors also. But climate change do affect agriculture. So that is the second change which I have observed. The third is that this realization of simultaneous treatment to production, distribution, and this consumption. Because it is now being realized that if we have to, for example, address health, we cannot ensure good health of individual unless we have healthy production, we have healthy storage, and we have healthy preservation, and we have healthy soil. You can keep expanding it. So I think this realization that all elements in this chain are connected. They are connected horizontally, they are connected vertically. So rather than addressing either the top segment, bottom segment, or middle segment, we need to address this entire change. That is another realization which is happening, and already people are debating it. The last thing which I would like to mention is again this realization that ensuring adequate food production is not an end itself, and it is also not sufficient. It is only a necessary condition. This is another realization that food production is not an end in itself. It is a mean to improve, to address food and nutrition security, vulnerability, better treatment to small and marginal holder, health, inclusiveness, etc. So I just find that the effect of this food system summit dialogue in terms of the debate which has been generated in Indian society, that is having multifarious effect. There is a lot of interest, and people are debating that it is not a easy concept, but at the same time, if we want to address the problem, we have to shift to this concept. So this is what I would like to say in response to.
Thank you very, very much indeed, Professor. Everybody, I'm just going to repeat what I got as the 4 main headings from what Professor Chan just said, only because I think they're worth holding in our minds as we continue this discussion, not just now in today's session, but also in our dialogue work in the 15 weeks between now and the summit. First of all, Professor Chan said that this whole system thinking, which had been in various quite isolated places, is suddenly spreading in India and becoming more widespread. It is, as he said, a real paradigm shift of coming out of silos and being comfortable with it. And I think this is so important because for many of us, being inside our silos was comfortable, and then trying to work across sectors and across disciplines was sometimes destabilizing. But Professor, you've just said that in your judgment, people are getting more comfortable. And I think that's hugely important because you're saying then, second point, this two-way linkage between food systems and the SDGs is so important. I've heard Mr. Guterres, the UN Secretary General, saying this. We can get the SDGs achieved if food systems are right. It's rather beautiful, actually, this recognition that the food is a real lever for improvement. Thirdly, your point that it's necessary to simultaneously look at production, distribution, and consumption. So it's a whole system approach. Is really interesting, but that's even more challenging, and I can quite understand that. But that's where your fourth point perhaps was the one that really hit home hardest. Of course, increasing production is necessary, but it's not sufficient, and that's when all the other parts of the whole sustainable development agenda come in. Well, colleagues, do have a think about whether or not these 4 points apply in your setting. And we look forward to continuing to hear from Professor Chand, who will join other conveners over the next few weeks, I hope, in sharing this way of thinking and actually checking to see just how many other countries are having similar experiences. Thank you again, sir. Now I'm going to come to Mr. Akimbek. I'm going to come to Mr. Akimbek Bektanaliev. Now, you are head of the Department for the Development of Agri-Food Value Chains of the Ministry of Agriculture, Water Resources and Regional Development of the Kyrgyz Republic. And you're here on behalf of His Excellency Azamat Mukashev, who is Deputy Minister in the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Water Management of the Kyrgyz Republic. And I'm asking you, Mr. Akimbek, what are you expecting from the Kyrgyz dialogues? And how do you plan to use the outcomes of the dialogues in shaping the pathway and encouraging collective action for food systems of the future? You have 3 minutes, sir, starting now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great to see you.
Ladies and gentlemen, allow me on behalf of Kyrgyz Republic to welcome all participants to the Asia-Pacific Regional Food Systems Dialogue. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to the UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for his initiative to hold such an important summit for the whole world. Ladies and gentlemen, the Kyrgyz Republic, as a member country of the United Nations, couldn't but respond to the call of the Secretary General, and we are currently preparing with support from UN systems for the national dialogues in preparation for the UN Summit on Food Systems. The Kyrgyz Republic has identified the following as the key topic of the national dialogues: sustainable food systems of the Kyrgyz Republic through the introduction of innovative solutions, a green economy, and adaptation to climate change. A variety of stakeholders are invited to participate in the national dialogues. These are state and municipal bodies, representatives of business communities and non-state bodies, farmers, and representatives of youth and women. Within the framework of the key topic of the national dialogues, the following topics will be proposed for discussion. First, access to food, food security, equal access, social support. Second, vulnerability of the population in terms of nutrition, agricultural intensification, and diversification. Third, rational production, reasonable consumption, environmental friendliness of production, and improvement of nutritional standards. We assume that the result obtained in the framework of both national dialogues and independent dialogues will be used to make changes and additions to policy documents adopted both at the industry level and at the country level as a whole. It must be said that the Kyrgyz Republic is carrying out certain work to ensure the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals in the field of food security. So today, the Food Security and Nutrition Program for 2019 to 2023 has been developed and is being implemented, which defines the strategic goal of food security and nutrition of the Kyrgyz Republic, a qualitative improvement in the nutrition of the population through the stable provision of the availability, accessibility, and safety requirements of foods. To achieve the goals, executive state bodies have been identified and the budget has been determined, which unfortunately is currently not being fully implemented since the country's budget is in deficit. The Kyrgyz Republic will strive to achieve all priorities, and we hope that the UN will support our country and find the opportunity to continue to provide both financial and technical assistance.
Hey, well, really, really clear statement, sir. Thank you very much indeed on behalf of all of us. It was so nicely presented because as I listened, I was thinking, how are you framing your dialogues? And you gave us this very clear statement that you're focusing on access to food, you're focusing on vulnerability in terms of undernutrition, and you're focusing on environmentally friendly and nutritious production. Thank you also for showing that you can bring together the national dialogues with the independent dialogues. That's really excellent. And thirdly, we're so pleased that you started from your existing strategies and then have used the dialogues to involve a lot of different stakeholders. Like you, I am hopeful that this work you're doing to develop the pathway to 2030 will also be helpful when you work with different partners in country and from other countries to make certain that you can modernize the Kyrgyz food system with a focus on equity and sustainability, as you have just proposed. Again, we look forward to working with you and the team over the next 15 weeks in the preparation for the summit and then after the summit as well. Everybody, just as we're going through this, I want you to just feel the richness. This is a very, very exciting process in this region. And so I really want to welcome Ting Jun Peng from China. Mr. Ting Jun Peng, your Deputy Director General, Department of International Cooperation in the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs. And we're going to talk about what is emerging from the China dialogues that are underway now and the kind of actions that are being identified. Now we're trying to get the interpretation right. So Ting Jun Peng, you speak in Chinese and then some interpretation will be following, and let's just see how it goes. You have the floor, sir.
好，谢谢 David 博士。
Thank you, Dr. Nairobi.
粮食是一个国家经济发展、社会稳定、国家治理的重要基础。中国是粮食生产消费第一大国，中国政府始终把保障国家粮食安全作为治国理政的头等大事。
Well, food is a fundamental pillar to the economic development, social stability, and the national independence of any country. China is the largest food producer and consumer in the world. And the Chinese government has made national food security a top priority in its governance.
提出了确保谷物基本自给、口粮绝对安全的新粮食安全观，走出了一条中国特色的粮食安全道路。
The Chinese government adopted the policy of ensuring the basic self-sufficiency of grain and the absolute security of staple food, and we have blazed a path of achieving food security with Chinese characteristics.
新中国成立70多年来，在中国共产党领导下，中国依靠自己的力量实现了丰衣足食，担稳了14亿人民的饭碗，为缓解世界粮食供需矛盾做出了积极贡献。
Well, more than 70 years of hard work led by the Communist Party of China since the establishment of the PRC has enabled China to produce enough food for its 1.4 billion people. By feeding ourselves, China is making a remarkable contribution to meeting the global food demand.
2020年突如其来的新冠疫情，对全球粮食供应链造成了很大冲击，但中国的粮食安全经受了重大考验，粮食产量再创新高，连续6年再上了1.3万亿斤台阶。
Well, the sudden onset of the COVID-19 in 2020 caused the massive shocks to global food supply chains. Fortunately, China has stood the test of the pandemic and continued to maintain the national food security. Its food production hit another record high, remaining above 650 million tons for 6 years in a row.
其他重要农产品 供应始终保持稳定，居民健康与营养状况明显改善，营养不良发生率降至2.5%，预设低碳和地理标志农产品加快发展。
Well, apart from that, the supply of other major agricultural products remained stable. The health and nutrition status of Chinese citizens witnessed a visible improvement, and the prevalence of malnutrition has dropped to 2.5%. Meanwhile, green, low carbon, and geographical indication products are thriving.
2020年，中国农业科技进步贡献率超过了60%，耕种收机械化率达到71%，全面消除绝对贫困，提前10年实现联合国2030年可持续发展议程减贫目标，为全球减贫事业和人类发展进步做出了重要贡献。
In 2020, technology advances contributed to over 60% of the growth in China's total agricultural output, and mechanization rate of its farming sector reached 71%. China has eradicated absolute poverty in the country, and by achieving the SDG goal on poverty 10 years ahead of the schedule, it has made vital contribution to the global cause of poverty reduction and humanity development.
中国国家对话会非常成功。我们回顾中国粮食农业发展成就，总结梳理了中国经验，聚焦粮食系统转型趋势，汇聚共识，探索解决方案，面向全球粮农共性问题，贡献中国智慧，提出了中国策略。
Well, China has had a successful national dialogue. The participants reviewed our achievements in food and agriculture, summarized China's experiences, elaborated on the trends in food systems transformation, and forged consensus on potential solutions. The national dialogue has offered Chinese wisdom and Chinese strategies to shared global problems in the food and agricultural sector.
按照峰会提出的5个轨道，我们明确了相应的行动方案。
And we have identified actions needed or required against the 5 action tracks.
关于粮食系统转型与政策支持，针对消费者从吃得饱到吃得好的消费新要求，中国将坚持长粮于地、长粮于技，辅之以利，辅之以义，克服农业成本上升的压力，把保障农民收益放在突出位置，进一步借鉴国际经验，完善农业支持政策，调动农民种粮务农积极性。
Well, first, about the transformation of China's food systems and policy support. Chinese consumers' focus has shifted from having enough to eat to eating well. China will further strengthen arable land protection and technology development, and improve incentives and accountability to support food production. We will work to ease the pressure from rising agricultural costs and give special attention to protecting farmers' benefits. We will improve agricultural support policies by further drawing on international experience so as to improve the incentives for farmers to produce food.
关于粮食生产与可持续发展，考虑到气候变化、生态系统退化、生物多样性下降以及环境污染等因素，已成为粮食安全的重要外部约束性条件。中国将推动农业资源用养结合，不但修复农业生态系统，不但健全绿色生产体系，坚持农业绿色低碳发展。
Second, about food production and sustainable development. Our efforts to ensure food security is severely hindered by many external factors, including climate change, degradation of ecosystems, loss of biodiversity, and environmental pollution. Therefore, China will advocate for an integrated resource utilization and conservation approach in agriculture. We will work relentlessly to restore agricultural ecosystems, develop green production systems, and adhere to the green and low carbon development pattern.
关于粮食减省与冲击应对，中国粮食产后损失主要受技术、装备和政策等因素影响。我们将选育高产优质抗逆品种，推广新型栽培技术，完善农业保障政策，加强农业灾害风险管理，科学应对各种类型的灾害，提升防灾减灾和灾后恢复能力。
A third, about food loss reduction and shock response. Main factors that affect the post-harvest loss in China include technology, machinery, policies, etc. And in order to address this issue, we will commit to breed varieties that are high in yield, quality, and tolerance, extend new cultivation practices, improve agricultural insurance policies, and build our capacity to enhance risk management for natural disasters, launch science-based responses, and improve the resilience of agriculture.
关于城乡居民的粮食安全与公平生计，中国将坚持和放大脱贫攻坚的有益经验，用好政府主导、多方参与的工作模式，贯彻精准帮扶理念，调动脆弱人群的人生动力和自我发展能力。
And fourth, about food security and equitable livelihoods. China will adhere to and scale up its successful experience in poverty alleviation. We will implement programs led by government and participated by various stakeholders. We will follow through the targeted poverty alleviation strategy and boost the self-motivation and abilities of vulnerable groups to pursue development.
关于可持续的食物消费，针对中国食物消费特点，我们推进食物营养与健康知识普及，加强居民消费引导，健全食物营养制度体系，推进可持续食物消费。谢谢。
And last, about sustainable food consumption. Based on the features of food consumption in China, we will work to disseminate knowledge on health and nutrition, provide consumers with better guidance, and establish sound institutional systems for nutrition so as to promote sustainable food consumption. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for this really comprehensive analysis of the experiences of China, and in particular, the description of what is emerging from the dialogues in your country. I have left a gap in case there's a need for any interpretation. I note the 5 areas that have been identified. They focus on incentivizing production of food of high quality. The emphasis, secondly, on nature positive production systems, very clear. Thirdly, the focus on resilience of food systems, including a series of interventions that are directly designed to ensure greater resilience at the farm level. Then a focus on livelihoods, and particularly ensuring that livelihoods are strong and are maintained, with a focus on vulnerable people. And then an emphasis on educating the public on nutritious and consumption patterns for their longer term health and well-being. Thank you so much for the clarity, and we look forward to working with representatives from the People's Republic of China as we move forward in developing the pathways together, and also in bringing together priorities from different countries in advancing in the areas that you have identified. Really exciting. And now I'd like, if it's okay, to move on to our next speaker. And we're going to travel to Papua New Guinea. I want to say that it's with enormous pleasure that I welcome Ms. Regina Nukunja to join our discussion. And I have to say that this is the first time that Papua New Guinea has engaged in a summit organized by the United Nations Secretary General focusing on food systems. And I'm really pleased that you, in your position as Acting Deputy Secretary for Policy and Planning in the Department of Agriculture and Livestock, have joined us, and you're going to share with us some of the early thinking about the plans for National Food System Summit dialogues in Papua New Guinea, and in particular, your own sense of how the dialogues will help to identify the actions that will assist the people of Papua New Guinea to have the food systems that you need by 2030. Regina Nukunj, you have the floor now. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, everyone. I am pleased to and appreciate the organizers for putting Papua New Guinea into as a panel member and into participating in this dialogue. And we thank the UN ESCAP for inviting us today at this regional meeting. And also we would like to mention that PNG is delighted to participate in the preparatory processes and dialogues leading up to the main summit in September. On that, PNG had begun the dialogues preparations in April of this year, and we have the core working group as the Department of Agriculture and Livestock as the national convener, and also here with the department, together with the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade, and with very close collaboration and support from the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization in the country office in Papua New Guinea. So, and we have so far, you know, that PNG being the first time to join in this food summit dialogues, we wanted to cover the whole country as a whole, and we have a diverse, a diversity in terms of the people, the culture, the foods production systems, and the food systems itself, ranging from the subsistence as much as into the intermediate and the modern food systems that we try to adopt into our food system. And therefore, we have organized and conducted two regional, that is within PNG, and we call it two subnational dialogues. And that is, we have used the 5 action tracks as a guide, and but also at the same time for PNG, we have very much so, you know, our country is going through this, you know, the COVID and also other shocks and stresses in terms of climate related to droughts, volcanoes, earthquakes. So, and much of our people that are rural-based, women, children, and youth, and the vulnerable groups are affected. Therefore, we felt that from PNG, we should add another action track, maybe we can call that, or an objective that we strongly feel that we should take it up and include in our dialogues together with the 5 objectives or action tracks suggested by the UN. And this is empowering women and youth as key drivers of food system change. And so we are we feel that it is important to bring the discussion on women and youth participation and engagement in our dialogues, because most of our farming production systems and farming system is really rural-based. We have subsistence production systems as well as semi-commercial and commercial plantation systems, and therefore we felt that they contribute much of the labor force, the labor input into the food production and the food systems, starting from seed to farm to the plate. Therefore, we have included this objective in our dialogue discussions. And further, we also would like to advise that PNG has successfully as I've mentioned, convened the two subnational dialogues, and we're looking forward to conducting our national dialogue next month. So far, as due to COVID, and we have, have to conduct all this virtually, and most of our people, from the districts and the provinces, they've yet to get, the Zoom meetings and get that in. So we have hybrid meetings in our last two subnational meetings. We have participants from all stakeholders, the development partners as well as private sectors and the government. And most of our development partners, they were able to join virtually with the private sectors, but many of our government participants, especially from the region, the provinces and the districts, were unable to, so we had to bring them in physically. And this was something that we had done. And we have mentioned that these dialogues have really assisted us to identify key challenges, gaps and actions that can be better taken to better the food systems in the country going forward. And some of these include introduction of early agriculture education into the high school systems, and increase of public awareness on nutritious and safe food. We also feel that empowerment of local farmers through microcredit facilities in the agriculture startups would also be able to help most of our producers be able to produce and throughout the whole food system be able to participate actively to ensure that there's enough safe and nutritious food made available to the consumers. The other challenge, we identified that there's policy gaps that will improve food systems in the country. And we felt that there needs to be enabling policies to empower women and youths active participation in the food system to improve it. And also, we also felt that there's a need to have, in terms of the shocks and the stresses due to COVID or due to the climate change impacts, we had, we have several interventions in the country on identifying our traditional foods. So,
I'm so sorry. Yeah, I'm afraid that is a timer, and it's me. Okay. It's from my little buzzer, and it's only because I know that there's so much happening in PNG, and there's a lot more for you to say. But we've got a couple more speakers in the next 15 minutes. So just if I can encourage you to reach your conclusions, that would be lovely. Okay,
thank you, David. And I'll just quickly mention that we have two outcomes that we're working towards, and one is the National Sustainable, Resilient and Improved Food Systems Pathway. And there's the other one that is the coalition of partners, either from the political level or even from the heads of the bureaucratic level, so that that would be our two outcomes at the end of the national dialogue that we'd like to bring forward to the summit. So with that, I think in closing, our preparations so far are going well, and we hope to convene the national dialogue and as scheduled. And we look forward to continued support by the UN FSS, the facilitating team, and FAO in country as well. So thank you very much.
Well, everybody, I have to tell you, I'm really lucky because I get to work with all the conveners. It's one of the opportunities, and with nearly 130 countries with nominated conveners, we have a wonderful team of people, and Regina is one of our star example conveners. What I enjoyed in her presentation was that she told us that in PNG they started with the action tracks, but they found there was an extra vital thing they had to bring in. So a little bit like we heard from China, what PNG is saying is we will want to make sure that our national characteristics are brought in to the dialogues. And that's where the empowering women and young people as drivers of the food systems transformation for PNG is the PNG way, and it's in there, and that's what we hoped would happen. And so I'm super pleased with the way you described it. Thank you for giving us also the challenges and gaps and then the actions that are emerging. And then finally, thank you for telling us that you will emerge with a pathway to sustainable food systems by 2030 and with a coalition, the PNG coalition, which is going to be so exciting. So thank you again for showing us how PNG is coming into the summit. I'm really grateful to you. Forgive me for interrupting you, just to help us move on. And now I'm going to move to Ritesh Das. Ritesh Das is Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Agriculture in Fiji. We've been working with the government of Fiji and colleagues in Fiji, and then more widely in the whole region on the future food systems that are needed. And it's really exciting. Actually, the Pacific has become a hotbed of real engagement of multiple stakeholders in thinking about the food systems of the future. And as we've heard, indeed, from Regina, the COVID crisis has really focused minds on what's needed to keep food systems resilient. And there's lots of exciting ideas coming from Fiji. And that's what we're asking Ritesh Das to tell us in his 3-minute presentation, starting now. You have the floor, sir. Nice to see you. I can see you on my...
Thank you, David. It's really good to see you as well. Pula Vinaka to everyone, and special greetings to the organizers of the Asia Pacific Regional Food Systems Dialogue. Fiji acknowledges this opportunity to share with you some of the emerging actions from our UN Food Systems National Dialogue and how it can be best reflected in our future policies, in our future direction. Just to give you an outlay, Fiji hosted a series of national dialogues on each of the 5 different action tracks, commencing from the 10th of May, and the last action track being completed only yesterday. These dialogues were held at a crucial time as Fiji battles its second wave of COVID-19 pandemic with extremely restrictive measures and lockdowns in place that forced the organization of this forum to be conducted on virtual platform. All 5 action tracks encouraged participation from a total of around 580 stakeholders representing diverse sectors within Fiji, and it involved government officials, partners from the private sector and civil organizations, external and bilateral partners, community leaders, farmers, food processors, academics, etc. Now, to get into a little bit more detail on the action tracks and the outcomes, action track 1 focused on 3 main strengths. The first one being reducing the incidences of non-communicable diseases in the country, reducing inequalities to tackle hunger, and increasing access to nutritious and safe food. Outcomes of the discussions from this track focus on the following key areas. What changes do we need to make to our food systems and our behaviors to tackle the alarming rate of NCDs in the country? That is a prevalent issue. How should Fiji prioritize poverty from disaggregated perspectives through gender, ethnicity, education, etc., addressing inequality to ensure no one is left behind? There is a need to scale up on existing policies by ensuring more inclusion of nutrition-sensitive issues with social protection elements to cushion the impacts of future shocks. Action Track 2 focus on comprehensive exploration of Fiji's food systems, showing huge potential in aquaculture in terms of blue food and how existing initiatives can improve food and nutrition security. Some of the key outcomes from that action track was how can Fiji leverage transformation of its fisheries sector through the newly drafted National Fisheries Policy in line with international standards that ensures sustainable coastal development programs. There's a need to prioritize the finalization of Fiji policy on food and nutrition security And we need to be encouraging more scientific research on value adding and food preservation to unlock commercial processing potential in the country. On action track, we focus on protecting natural ecosystems, sustainable management of existing food production systems and restoration, rehabilitating degraded ecosystems and soil functions. And some of the key outcomes were exploring ways and means to safeguard its natural ecosystems by working towards deforestation-free, conversion-free, and overfishing-free production and trade systems. How best can local farmers and fishers consider nature-positive solutions in their agricultural activities to increase efficiencies, minimize externalities, and improve yields while maximizing that biodiversity and ecosystem functions, improving livelihoods and enhancing resilience to climate change. Focus on social, technical, financial potential to restore degraded systems at scale and determine how much land can be restored, and the quantum of investment required is also a key outcome. On Action Track 4, we focus on inequality in access to economic opportunities, productive resources and services, and gender inequality in the food systems. The vulnerable groups often have less economic opportunities and inability to cope up with multiple shocks such as cyclones and the pandemic. From the outcomes from this action track were how Fiji can create economic opportunities such as financial access or business startup packages to the vulnerable groups, linking subsistence farmers to markets and institutionalizing value chains, improving value additions and scientific research, using a multi-sectoral approach in the food production systems. This is the government, the landowners, and the other relevant key stakeholders to work collaboratively to attract more investment in the agriculture sector. We need to consider policies that will enhance home gardening and school gardening programs and implementing digital technology platform to facilitate access to economic opportunities. Finally, on our Action Track 5, we focus on economic, social, and environmental resilience. How can Fiji initiate inclusive processes to identify aspects of local food systems that needs change, encouraging divergent and convergent viewpoints to ensure environment resilience and empowerment of women and young people to withstand shocks, stress in the food systems, and higher level of participation into food production systems. And finally, promoting innovative solutions to early warning systems. So we have completed the dialogues, and it's a very challenging environment, and we look forward to participating in other regional and the global dialogues that is yet to come. So thank you, Vinaka Vakalavu and Dhanyavad.
Well, thank you so much, Ritesh Das, for this very, very helpful presentation. I'm telling you why, everybody. You see, what's happened in Fiji is that the Food Systems Summit has offered an opportunity for government and people to take account of the learnings from the COVID experience, which has not been nice in terms of disturbance to import pathways, and to start thinking hard about what are the strategic options for actually moving to a little bit more of a national control over the food system. And I feel a really interesting shift, and I love the way in which you described it, sir, with where you're saying actually sustainability is going to be at the heart of this, resilience is going to be at the heart of this, and then we're going to really build on the potential that we have for a sustainable blue food system. We know it's going to take time, but that is our brilliant resource. And then at the same time, we're going to look ahead, and we're going to make a way to ensure that women and young people are more central. Isn't it interesting? We heard that also, everybody, coming through from Papua New Guinea when Regina and Kunj was speaking. And I think it may well be a pattern starting to emerge within the Pacific that, again, it's not being, nobody's saying this is the pattern you should follow. What's happening is that building on the strategies and involving the stakeholders, there is a pattern there. And everybody, I think this is why the dialogues process is so interesting. and it's not going to stop at the summit. It's going to go on. So once again, on all of our behalf, to thank Ritesh Das for helping us to work through this. Now I want to go to Indonesia, and I just want to check I have a namer for participation from Indonesia, but I'm getting WhatsApp messages telling me there may be a change. So just in case it goes wrong, let me give it a try. There is a thing saying Anang Negro is here, but I don't think it's Anang behind, because I can recognize Anang and you're not Anang. So I think your name might be Ifan Martino. And so if Ifan Martino, who's got a different name in front of him, would like to make the presentation from Bappenas, I recognize the entrance of Bappenas behind you. You have the floor. Try to, if you can, to keep inside about maximum 5 minutes, if you don't mind, because we're over time. Over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David. First of all, I would like to apologize that Pak Anang Nugroho, our director, just got a call from the minister. So he is now on a meeting with the minister.
Got it. Happens to us all. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So he asked me to deliver his prepared slide, just one slide. If you allow me, I can share.
Of course. While you're setting that up, let me just tell everybody, because I just got the message. There's a lovely the way things work here. I think you are. You're a planner from the Directorate of Food and Agriculture. Is that right? In Bappenas.
Yes.
And so,
that's correct.
And off you go. I'll try not to interrupt you anymore. I will come in after 5 minutes, only because I'm super worried about time. Thank you.
Okay. Can you see the slide?
Yeah, it's visible. Yeah. On my screen, it's visible. Thank you.
Okay. So we already had our first discussion on April 27th, if I'm not mistaken. So we came up with this action areas that you can see from the slide. From action track 1, we have these areas that we are going to focus on. The first is to strengthen the improvement of social safety nets. And then we will also focus on home gardening, urban farming, and family farming. And we will also facilitate the food SMEs in Indonesia. And we also will strengthen the food planning capacity up to the regional level. And we also would like to have some behavioral change through education. And we would also like to diverse our consumption. And we will also like to address the food loss and waste problem in Indonesia. And for action track 2, we will focus on food literacy. In particular, we will focus on consumption, the safety of the food loss and waste again, and also the gender issues. We will also focus on local foods and also the research and development for the food supply technology. And we will also have the incentives for healthy food. And this mechanism is like incentive and disincentive, so we can have like healthy food for the people in Indonesia. And we would like also to focus on the data and information of the food system. For the action track 3, we will focus on conservation of the agriculture and supply chain efficiency, and again the food loss and waste. And we also focus on the from single production to production diversity, and from land to marine based food systems. So we will include the aquaculture in our food systems too. And we also want to make sure that the participation of smallholders in the food systems. And move on to action track 4. We will focus on the access of the farmers to resources, this including the land, capital, and information. And we also want to strengthen our farmers and fisher institutions. And we also would like to what do you call it, to increase the capacity of our farmers and fishers, and to also increase the additional value and also the circular economy. And also we would like to change the food from expensive to affordable food. And for action track 5 about resilience, we would like to establish BUMN is the, what do you call it, the government-owned enterprise about food. So this holding will manage about the food system in Indonesia. We also would like to map and decentralize our food research, and also we will focus on food logistics and technology, including innovation and investment.
Right.
And we also like to explore more on the biodiversity of our food, and also to increase the capacity of the community and strengthen the role of women in our food system. But the most interesting is this two cross-cutting issues. The first one is the food system regionalization, technology, economic and fiscal incentives, and also strengthening the national food institutions and also the national logistics system. And also, since Indonesia is an archipelago, so we, what do you call it? We will focus on the transformation of our national food system that based on the fact that our country is an archipelago. I think that will be all. I'm sorry if I made any mistakes.
Oh, mistake. How can you say you made a mistake? That was beautiful. On behalf of everybody who's listening and also, of course, everything on YouTube, I just want to say what a lovely presentation. You start with the action tracks and then you make it Indonesian in flavor. And then in addition, you've actually done a lovely thing with the cross-cutting, because on the one hand, you're saying we must be locally specific. After all, we're a huge archipelago and there are so many differences in our food systems right across our giant nation. And at the same time, you need to have an overall strategic approach for your food systems transformation as well. And I'm watching this. I mean, as you know, I've been working with you and with Bapinas over the years, and I feel it really, really starting to happen, getting everybody focusing on this systems approach, as we heard earlier from other countries, and then saying within that systems approach, how do we make sure that the people who really matter are given the greatest central role in this? And that's why I really love it that you, right at the beginning, you said safety nets, and you start from the people. And that's a beautiful thing. And then you built in the nutrition and health. You've built in the environmental sustainability. You've built in biodiversity. You've built in small and medium enterprises. And then I was thinking, how are you going to make this all happen? And then you brought the two cross-cutting, the regionalization and the national transformation strategy. And so everybody, this is our stock take of what's happening in the Food Systems Summit dialogues in this giant region of East Asia and the Pacific. Goodness me, you are home to such a high proportion of the world's population, and so many farmers and fishers and livestock keepers and forest dwellers and food processors are in your region. But you're not scared. You're saying, okay, we have a food summit, we have some national strategies, let's take advantage of this food summit and really stimulate this transformative action that is necessary. And there's a wonderful feeling at the end of this session in our meeting of countries on the move, really, really exciting, showing leadership. And that's just everybody, last words, that's what this summit is going to be. It's a real festival of an exciting time when communities and nations as collections of stakeholders are able to say, we're going to be joining our national governments, our local authorities in the transformation of our food systems so that food helps us to achieve the SDGs by 2030. Thank you for the leadership you're showing in this summit, a people's summit, a summit for the member states, and a summit for the world. Thank you, everybody. It was the most wonderful session. On to the next part, and thank you to our panelists who've been just superb. If I could give big applause, I would, but as it is, just all I can do from the bottom of my heart is to thank you and to return to the rest of the session.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, Rameshji. Thank you all. Thank you, Bapanas team, Team Bapanas. Thank you, Team PNG. Thank you, Team China. Thank you very much also, Team Fiji.
Thank
It's really good. Yeah, brilliant, brilliant. Team Kyrgyzstan, you were great, just lovely. Thank you for taking the trouble to such a nice statement, which we were easily able to follow. Team Cambodia, your example is extraordinary, really, really extraordinary. Okay, I've got to stop now. Back to Katinka. I think, Katinka, you might be talking with your mute on, and I bet you're going to feel frustrated for that, so I'm saying it very gently.
Thank you very much, David.
That's why you had your mute on. Well, while Katinka is unmuting, I just want to say this is a real brilliant moment by ESCAP and by all the other organizations that are setting it up, to have this opportunity for sharing between nations, between conveners, is just special. So Katinka, as soon as you unmute, I'll be quiet. But I do want to give credit to all the people, particularly Katinka, who had the idea to do it. And you probably don't know, but we've had numerous email exchanges with the ESCAP team because they wanted to make really certain that this is a session where actually we're talking about things that are going to make a difference in the countries. And I'm so grateful to all the panelists for being action-oriented. So good. Where this is a transformative process. Katinka, can it work now without feedback? Let's see.
Is this better? Can I be heard?
Yeah, you are excellent.
Thank you so much, David, for this excellent session. And I want to add my thanks also to all the panelists. And maybe just a quick word that it was not just me. There's a whole big team behind this, all working in the background. But again, thank you so much to all of you for really focusing on actions at country level. And we would now, for the next session, like to turn our attention to the regional level. For the second panel, Opportunities for Regional Action, we plan to focus on cross-cutting areas that can accelerate the action tracks. And for this session, I'm very pleased to welcome Professor Emon Udomskes-Malé, who's Senior Advisor and former Director of the Institute of Nutrition at Mahidol University, and also the Chair of the Board of IFPRI. She will join us today as a moderator, and without much further ado, I would like to hand the floor over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katinka, and all of the efforts of the team. And thank you, David, and all the panelists of round one. I listened with so much inspiration, and to feel that is the way we are going, and it's the right way to do. Lots of people say, well, Asia Pacific region, and David has said it's a giant region, but when we think about Asia Pacific, has to do with scale. Anything below.
Excuse me, Professor Emon. Excuse me if I interrupt. I think we have difficulties hearing you. Could you move closer to the microphone?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. microphone hidden.
This is much
Sorry.
better, indeed. I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. I have to
I should have
begin again.
interrupted you earlier. Please
Yeah,
go
so
ahead.
sorry. But I want to thank, thank the round one panelists and also David to pave the way to this one. We are now going into focus of region. An Asia Pacific region blows you away with scale. Population, highest, is significant burden of malnutrition in all its forms. It has the largest number of farmers and also the smallholder farmers produce most of the world's food. Diversity that they do produce, improve the healthy diet. And this is where we would like to be able to encourage. We also looking at Asia Pacific as the economic pillar, as well as, you may have guessed, the largest human capital in the world. This is why we are here, why we want to talk about that. In the March of this year, there's a roundtable on SDG 2, and they have some recommendations. And I just want to go briefly that this region holds both problems as well as solutions within the region that we need to explore. First, the recommendation has to do with, to achieve sustainable food system, it requires an integrated approach. And you have heard from round one. It is true that across sectors and discipline, we need to bring people together. Investment and public-private partnership has to be considered. The second recommendation is leverage social protection system to enhance food security and nutrition outcomes. Well, that can't be better than this time. When you have COVID-19, everybody push forward social protection system up front. Can we ride on that momentum? This is where I think there's an opportunity. The third recommendation is to strengthen the urban agriculture and local food production that can improve nutrition and access to food among the urban poor. There's a lot of noises in this urban space, and you will probably have heard and have seen many of the documentaries that has to do with that. But this is where Asia Pacific particularly can capitalize on that momentum too. Fourth recommendation is to restore the health of agroecological system to boost resilience. The expansion of this practice are important to restore the critical ecosystem function and promote resilient food system. And this is what a win-win situation is to be between food for the people and also healthy for the planet too. So this can be done both by bringing that together. The fifth recommendation is effective recovery response will need to pay attention to the gender impact. Lots of talks has already been done to bring women, and I think now we also see the youth, that generation, into the picture. They should be engaged. If women can be engaged in policy making process, particularly access to land, they will be at a better opportunity to bring changes. The sixth recommendation has to do with digitalization. We live differently. I think before pandemic arrived, we know it's IT, the world is changing, but it's now speed up because that's the way we have to do our communication even right now. So this is where technology is advancing. It can help if we can bring that for strengthening sustainability and resilience through supply chain, as well as improve traceability. So we will know where food comes from. How is it produced? Is it good for you? Some of these things can be done. And the data governance in food system to avoid inequality and by promoting data privacy and transparency are also key. And last one of number 7 recommendation is the data availability to inform policy and program by providing regular data on household food security, affordability of diet, and consumer choices. So this is the time where I think data is power, and it will become part of our dialogue from now on. So those are wonderful recommendations, and I would like to now introduce our panelists. We have a wonderful set of panelists who will be able to help guiding us to take a look at this from the regional lens, because by bringing national action and moving that forward, there are certain areas where regional action could help steer it forward. And this is where we would like to start. I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Jacqueline Hughes, Director General of the International Crops Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics, ICRISAT. Dr. Hughes, we already heard from the previous speakers about how food systems are vulnerable to several other shocks and stress, in particularly climate-induced ones. Can new technologies be the game changer for building resilience, and what does the region need to achieve it? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Emon. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to participants in this dialogue. So climate-induced stresses and shocks affect the food systems in many ways, ranging from direct effects on the crop growth and production, disruption to markets, spikes in food prices, supply chain infrastructure issues. The relative importance of climate change impacting food systems differs from one region to another, and there's no single solution to build resilience across all our diverse food systems. Local solutions are needed, building on global experience and vice versa. So these climate-induced shocks and stresses are often magnified by the underlying social, economic, and political fault lines. These disconnects give us poor preparedness and slow and sometimes ineffective responses. In some countries, there's little alignment between the specific farming systems, new proposed policies, climate change adaptation interventions, and the allocation of financial and technical resources. Let me touch on some of the new technologies in plant breeding of improved varieties. Why? Because we need new climate-adapted, pest and disease-resistant, more productive, more nutritious varieties, and more quickly. We have rapid generation advancement, so we shorten the generation time between each crop cycle by up to 70%, which speeds up the time of getting a new variety to the market. We look at gene editing for addressing intractable traits, in our case for rancidity in pearl millet, where gene editing is a time-saving technology. We have striga, a parasitic weed, and there is no sustainable source of natural resistance available. Aflatoxins, technology that we are using is a host-induced gene silencing. We can use reverse breeding, a new technology where you can split a heterozygous crop into the two parents, used for improving water use efficiency, carbon capture, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Marker-assisted breeding also compresses breeding time, and breeding can be done in one location for another location. Phenotyping, that's the observable characteristics of a plant or an animal resulting from its interaction with its environment. And we can use specialized semi-static sensors, and now we're beginning to use drones in the field for faster data collection. There are also new technologies to conserve plants and animals in addition to the conventional gene banks with in vitro cryopreservation, for example. But now we're identifying gene sequences and ensuring that they can be accessed and used. We've also got new technologies for improving crop production. And why do we need that? To feed the growing world population with the same amount of arable land. Smart agriculture using a combination of precision ag, satellite-based weather data, yield estimation, crop insurance, supply chain enhancements through blockchain for traceability, as Emon just said, certification of design qualities to add value. We can also have integrated simulation modeling for implementing research-informed climate-smart farming policies. It's not a new tool, but modeling is not widely used for informing policies. More broadly, and to wrap up, public research agencies should adopt these new technologies for wider, faster dissemination, strengthening national capacities and productivity. But we need regional cooperation on tech transfer. Adoption of new technologies can often be slow when national investment is required. It can also be very slow when it needs to move across countries. We need supportive policies in country, agreements at the regional level, and advocacy of game-changing technologies. Some game-changing technologies will transcend national boundaries, and therefore these regional agreements are so important to assure uptake. Thank you, Emon.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. So the answer to that question, I think there are potential, as you have outlined, and that regional cooperation and collaborative uptake of technologies are important. So let me now move to our second panelist, Ms. Esther Penunier, who's Secretary General of the Asian Farmers Association of AFA, a regional alliance of national farmer organizations that represent women and men family farmers engaged in small-scale farming. Ms. Penunier, may I ask you about, as we discuss how to improve food systems and food security, we know this will depend on the improved conditions of the tens of millions of our region's small-scale farmers that produce majority of our food. How can we advance equitable livelihood for the small farmers that we are calling to adopt more sustainable and efficient production methods?
Thank you, Dr. Emon, for the question, and good afternoon to everyone. We thank UN ESCAP for inviting us to this Asia-Pacific Region FSS Independent Dialogue. Farming is a noble livelihood as farmers produce food, and food is essential to every human being on earth. However, many who are farming today are farming not because of choice, but because there is no other choice. Many of the young people do not like to go farming because they see farming as an occupation that does not earn. Plus, it is tedious and unglamorous, and you will stay in areas without basic social services and infrastructure. So, equitable livelihoods is a great ambition. In AFA, we propose 3 game-changing solutions to advance equitable livelihoods. First is ensuring family farmers' rights to basic natural resources, mainly lands, waters, forests, and seeds. In some Asian countries, at least a third of farmers are still landless or are working in farms as tenants, sharecroppers, seasonal farm workers, and enjoy only 30% of the income from the farm. In many countries, social or community forestry is not implemented effectively, and still many indigenous peoples communities and local farming communities do not have rights to lands and forests. We need secured rights to lands and forests to incentivize us to make long-term plans for our farming business. We need land for production, for storage and warehouse, retail and processing facilities to prepare and cook our food, to help in the waste management of our processing. Who owns and controls these land resources have a definite say in how food will be produced, processed, marketed, consumed. In promoting rights to lands, we need to give equal rights to women farmers. We are exploring possibility of advocating for an ASEAN guidelines on customary tenure. Second is promoting the agency of family farmers. especially their organizations, their cooperatives, their enterprises, building their capacities to increase their market power so they will have better incomes, and to increase their social and political power so they engage with their governments, with their business partners on agriculture-related matters. Many farmers are mere price takers, not price makers. The raw materials we produce are priced so low, while the processed products from our raw produce are priced 3-4 times higher, most often in prices we cannot afford. We know that cooperatives have some bad perceptions in many countries in Asia, but we know also very successful cooperatives who have provided full value chain services as well as an integrated package of economic and social services to their members, and in the process, creating jobs in their communities. In ASEAN, APA is working with the ASEAN Sectoral Working Group on Agriculture Cooperatives and the ASEAN Center for the Development of Agriculture Cooperatives. And in SAARC, we are working with the SAARC Agriculture Center in promoting a roadmap for strengthening gender and age-sensitive agriculture cooperatives in these sub-regions. Also, with regards to the agency of farmers, farmers' organizations can build capacities of farmers and can engage in partnership with our governments in the effective implementation of the 13 principles of the responsible agriculture investments, as well as the effective implementation of the voluntary guidelines on the responsible governance of tenure of lands, fisheries, and forests in the context of national food security. Thirdly, very quickly, is incentivizing and valuing the various economic services that family farmers provide, such as in landscape and ecosystem restoration, in promoting biodiversity, in providing local, fresh, healthy food. Valuing this means public procurement of their products, providing grants for appropriate equipments and machines and facilities that farmers need, ensuring access to finance, needed capital, markets, information needed to do agroecology and climate resilient agriculture, and providing social services and infrastructure such as internet, connectivity, electricity, and water, and strengthening local markets, especially support for direct farmer-consumer relationships. Hope this helps, and thank you, Dr. Emon. Back to you.
Thank you very much. That is very helpful. So you really show us that there are ways that we can improve that livelihoods of the family farmers and make that, you know, farmers. And it was struck to me that nobody really want to be a farmer. And it's something that there are no other choices. To make that as something that people want to really do, this is where you improve the value, integrity and dignity, and farmers produce the food we eat so they can be proud. So that really to me are very, very important, and thank you very much. I'm now pleased to go to our next panelist, Mr. S.M. Nasser Hussain, who has several positions, but I would like to engage him in his role of president of the Chittagong Divisional Unit of the Consumer Association of Bangladesh. Mr. Hussain, what can be done to increase the accessibility to safe food, especially in the region's developing countries?
Thank you, moderator. Distinguished guest, head of organizer, and panelist, and the participant. I really thankful and grateful to the organizer to giving opportunity to say something from Bangladesh. As per your question, with regard to increase the accessibility of safe food by all consumers, I would like to emphasize to supply and demand side first on whole supply chain of food
which include production, processing, storing, packaging, transportation, distribution, and marketing. If we can ensure all these stages of supply chain, then accessibility to safe food can be ensured. Therefore, an effective and well-functioning supply chain and collaboration among primary producers, intermediaries, and consumers are utmost important. When we will be able to establish effective and well-functioning supply chain of food, then consumer can get safe and nutritious food. In order to produce safe food, we need to introduce some good practice at primary production stage, at transportation and handling stage, and also at processing stage. We need to introduce good agricultural practice for the crops and vegetable, good animal husbandry practices for livestock and poultry, good aquaculture practices for the fisheries, good handling practices at transportation stage, and good manufacturing practices at processing stage. When these good practices will be implemented, we hope safe food will be produced. We also need to harmonize the food standard at regional and sub-regional level. Therefore, trade among the countries can be increased. Another important aspect that I would like to emphasize is on our consumer awareness on safe food. Current food label may seems to be possess a plenty of information, but there are often challenging to read. Ingredients are often printed in painfully small font. Another big issue with the nutrition label is that no one bothers to read them anymore. Therefore, I think the traffic light labeling system on packaging food label will enable consumer to understand easily whether a food is high, medium, or low amount of fat, saturated fat, sugar, number of calories. If we look at our food sector, we feel sorry to see that many of our people are hungry, especially in the COVID-19 pandemic situation. The quantity of food should be increased, and at the same time, the purchasing power of the people should also be improved. The quality of food is equally important as the quantity of food. Consumers need to be assured about what they consume. We would like to support small and medium scale enterprise and fresh food production. The global climate change is one of the most significant environmental issues of the present world. Particularly in the developing countries, there is no doubt that agriculture is being badly affected by the climate change. Climate change is likely to contribute substantially to food insecurity in future by increasing food prices and reducing food production. We need to promote climate smart agriculture as an approach to address the challenges of food security and climate change. We need to focus on strategies like adaptation, mitigation, and disaster risk management to reduce the impact of climate change, will eventually contribute to climate resilient development pathway. We need to develop climate resilience crops, livestock, breeds, and farm practice. We need to improve cross-border trade and emphasize economic empowerment of women through greater cross-border trade and commerce. We also require focusing on inclusive development of road, rail, and island waterway infrastructure that can connect local communities to regional market. ICT facilities also can play an important role in providing farmers with useful information such as weather reports and crops price, as well as educating them about new farming technique in this region. Interregional trade can improve overall food availability, and collective effort are also be useful in South Asian countries, join hand to ensure safe food for all. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hussain. So those are very insightful, particularly on consumer, of how we can make them be aware and empower them more for the decision. That we have to make sure that whatever come to them are of quality and safety. So very, very good, and thank you very much for that thoughts. I am now pleased to invite the next panelist, Mr. Paul Nicholson, who is leading the rice research and sustainability efforts for Olam International in Asia. And Mr. Nicholson, as we are called to optimize food production, processing, and distribution together with a more sustainable use of resources, what actions are needed at the regional level to improve the sustainability of consumption patterns?
And so first off, thank you for this opportunity, not just to share, but also to learn. I really appreciate it. I should probably introduce Olam a little bit. We're a large rice agribusiness with origination in the Asian region in India, Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam. We also have outgrowers projects in Vietnam, Thailand, and India. We're working directly with farmers. When it comes to the region, I guess I would start with rice specifically, which is sort of my area of expertise, where rice is, accounting for 144 million households of production globally. 90% of that in Asia. It's a staple crop for half the world, and it has some unfortunate consequences. It has a 90% correlation with poverty, a 65% correlation with malnutrition. It uses 30% of the world's irrigation, and it is accounting for a large amount of methane just below livestock in the agricultural systems. So there's a lot of issues then around rice that would relate from a regional level. I think the first one is going to be on the input side. So if we're going to think about the sustainability of the crop, we need to think about those landscape level issues that touch across multiple countries. Water being the paramount initial issue. Water is compounded not just by availability on riparian or river access, but also on quality issues, upstream water quality affecting rice fields or downstream water quality affected by the farmers' practices. So I think water would be a first place for regional efforts, and some are there. The next one that I would bring up, and I just heard this, is the effect of water availability due to climate change, where we're seeing more and more common instances of droughts in our systems or even floods. So the variance around weather is becoming problematic. And that would bring me to food systems. Within Asia is a mix of countries that are surplus producers and deficit countries. There should be some dialogue, and there is, but maybe increased transparency between expected needs between potential deficit countries and the ability for surplus production. As these systems come under pressure for more and more sustainable calls, there needs to be an assurance on food security regionally, such that the surplus producers aren't phasing out too much of surplus production for the deficit countries' needs. Finally, I think I would turn to alignment. Policy alignment is fairly critical to the private sector. So as I think of alignment on policy, I just heard labeling, which is a great example of an area where countries could align on defining sustainability or information to the consumer across countries. Also, food safety would be another area where alignment should be put forth. So on food safety, we're seeing divergence and tightening of food safety standards, but they're divergent. They're also unaligned oftentimes with crop input permissions for the farmers. So getting alignment on a regional level between the food safety import standards as well as the upstream production systems would be another area of work. To move all of this forward, you're going to have to integrate the data, and I was happy in your introduction that you brought this up, there needs to be alignment on data definitions. The digital systems require clarity between the definitions of collected data upstream in order to produce the insights that we're looking for in the food systems and enact change. But that change can't happen, and I was overjoyed to hear the farmers' representatives mention this, without some incentive to the farmers. So on the livelihood side, to bring about sustainability in the systems, we need to focus on livelihoods. Some of that could be on a circular economy methodology, where a lot of biomass in these fields goes underutilized versus potential. So greater innovation, greater investment towards biomass solutions would be a way of improving livelihoods. Optimizing the crop basket for the farmers would be another place where we see activities, and market linkage in rice. A large portion of the production, in fact, the majority of the production, is subsistence level. As we start seeing or continue to see the urbanization push, you're losing rural farmers and replacing them with urban consumers. So as that occurs, there needs to be some insight then on what needs to happen at the subsistence level to improve those yields and bring surplus into the markets, such that they're better attached to the market linkages that are going to be demanded in the future. Moving past that, it would be food loss. So food loss upstream, it needs to be looked at alongside the production methodology. So obviously mechanization is one way towards that, but even the supply chain, so aggregation centers and whether or not they're tarping underneath the crop to avoid food loss at the redistribution points, is a simple methodology that can add to the overall availability of the crop. On the digital systems that the data feeds into, obviously, the more open the digital systems are across a regional level, the more insights we can derive and the better transparency can occur between the countries, their planning, and preferably the policymakers. That form of alignment between the countries should create the infrastructure to encourage further investment, which I've seen oftentimes as an outcome that's desired by the countries and the regions. But greater alignment leads to greater predictability for business such as ours, and that aids the development that's sought after.
Very much. Those are very, very helpful, and we really think beyond rice and into how region can work together, and rice is leading the way because it's just the main staple and people understand, and that's one of their livelihood. We live in the culture of rice-based diet. So appreciate that from that aspect. Thank you. And my next question is for Mr. Salman Hussain from UN Environment, where he is acting head of the Ecosystem Services Economic Unit and coordinates the economics of ecosystem and biodiversity. Mr. Hussain, one of the action tracks proposed for the summit is to boost nature-positive production. What does the region need to make food production become more nature-positive while remaining economically viable at the scale needed to ensure food security for all?
So, Professor Norm, thank you very much for the introduction. As I said, I'm working for UNEP, and I'm going to make your life as facilitator a bit easier by giving you a one-line answer. My one-line answer is nature-positive production is already economically viable. It's just that we don't know it, right? So the reason we don't know it is basically because we fail to measure what matters. What we tend to measure, we try to optimize, is yield per hectare. Mm-hmm. And what we fail to recognize is there are myriad impacts and externalities, as economists call them, across the value chain, both positive and negative. Some of the negative ones, for instance, apply because we're looking at ecosystems, the impact on ecosystems. But we don't typically tend to market those. They don't appear in our financial calculus. So say, for instance, we know it's a very real impact if we have nutrient runoff, which as a consequence actually depletes fisheries resources, okay, creating dead zones. But that isn't part of the financial calculus. When a farmer is making the decision as to whether or not to, how much fertilizer to put on his or her field, he or she isn't thinking about that. It isn't part of the equation. And that's what in economic terms is important, because we know in economic terms, the loss in livelihoods, the health impacts, nutritional consequences of such actions are material. They affect our well-being. And so for economists, that is actually something included in the economic appraisal. It's not financial, but it's included in the economic. So the question is, how can we deal with this? One of the features, which is one of the issues coming forward very much in the Food Systems Summit overall, I was talking yesterday at the Global Summit, is true cost accounting, Now, what true cost accounting does is systematically look at all of these impacts and externalities, social, ecological, human, across the entire value chain. And if we start to do that, if we change the way we measure things and start to include these social, human, and ecological aspects, then we find, as I said when I introduced things, that the pro-conservation options, and indeed some of the ones that Olam are taking forward, we work with Olam as well, some of these pro-conservation options, say the Sustainable Rice Platform, are ones which are economically viable. What we need to do, though, is have a shift. We need to have a situation where we go from the saying that things are economically viable and showing that, recognizing and demonstrating those values, to actually capturing those values, so that we stop having this disconnect between the financial position and the economic position. So how do we do that? Well, there are various things we can do in terms of the region. We can think about, for instance, repurposing subsidies, thinking about the subsidies which are creating distortions, which are perverse, which are harming our community, which are harming our ecosystems, and repurposing them to things which are pro-conservation, pro-community. We can also think about, as mentioned already actually by Paul, thinking about standardization, certification, which also then gives the consumer the power to make an informed decision about the kind of choices which are going to be nature positive and human positive. So there are various things that we can do, and we have to understand, both in terms of governments, but also to the business and consumers, that we are impacting on natural ecosystems. They are being depleted and degraded. We can't continue. So even if we have profitability today, we can't continue that way. Those profits will subside because of erosion, because of lack of hydrological services. In 5-10 years or less, we can't persist in this. So what are we doing about this? Well, as you mentioned, Professor Arnam, I head up TEEB, the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity, which is a UN sponsored initiative. And then TEEB Agri-Food, we're looking to try to include these externalities and impacts across the entire value chain and make the case. And we're doing that in 5 of the countries in the region. We've had lots of South-South cooperation around that. And already we're actually making, I think, some very positive impact. So for an example, we had Indonesia on the call earlier today. And in fact, Pakanang is a focal point for our study. He couldn't join us. And Indonesia, because of our TEEB Agri-Food study, we have, for the very first time, had the inclusion of agroforestry in the 5-year development plan. Now that's really material. Just providing that scientific, rigorous evidence on true cost accounting on TEEB Agri-Food led to the inclusion of agroforestry. So I think valuation, economics can make a really big difference. And we just have to embrace the fact that true cost accounting paints the correct picture. And for too many years, we've been painting a very false picture. We need to address that to correct the balance and make us promote the right things within the economic system. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. And that's just an eye-opener when you say something like that, because most of the things people never thought about, the capital of the nature that has been given to us for free. What do we do about it? How do we bring that value more? And then not just dollars and cents, it has much more value than that. And COVID-19 pandemic has done something to that. As you know, the nature that has returned in several places and people were so happy. That's another value that we have to appreciate. Thank you very much. Yes, so now I would like to turn to Mr. Omer Safar, Principal Agriculture and Natural Resource Specialist at Asian Development Bank. We have heard previous speaker recommend several actions, but what are the opportunities in the region to scale up both public and private partnership in investments to finance this action? So we need to come back to the bank and, you know, all these things cannot happen. So your thought, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Imorn. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here on behalf of the Asian Development Bank. I'd like to thank ESCAP for the kind invitation. My response to this question is articulated in 4 points, and I'll try to respond from a slightly different perspective in order not to repeat what our distinguished and esteemed panelists have already said so well. My first point, and I want to surprise you a bit, my first point, the key precondition for improving and scaling up food systems is actually not related to agriculture. Global experiences show that the process of economic structural transformation or transformation of the economy across sectors is the necessary precondition for agriculture competitiveness and improved food systems. So across Asia and the Pacific, we see that structural transformation is going on in terms of sectoral share of GDP. In South Asia, agriculture now accounts for 16% of GDP, industry 24%, and services 50%. In East Asia and the Pacific, agriculture accounts for 8% of GDP, industry 38%, and services 54%. However, structural transformation is slow in terms of the sectoral share of employment. So in South Asia, 42% of employment is still in agriculture. In East Asia and Pacific, the share is 27%. Compare this with high-income countries globally, where only 3% of employment is in agriculture. So basically, in our region, a lot of people are employed in a sector, namely agriculture, which contributes relatively little to GDP. And what does this mean? This means low labor productivity, insufficient technological advancement, and low incomes in agriculture. So I propose to you the first requirement to scale up food systems is actually to promote policies and incentives for the growth of industry and services, and to create well-paying jobs in these sectors. Service and industry needs to absorb labor force out of agriculture. This will create the space for technological modernization and competitiveness in agriculture and food systems. And as demand grows, it will result in growing domestic demand for food products and over time, diversified and nutritious food products. My second point is that increased agricultural productivity and growth and competitiveness of food systems requires substantial private sector investment. Let's not focus on public sector. Public fiscal space is low and lower now across Asia due to COVID. It's private sector investments that's needed, but the business environment in many countries is not conducive for private investment. So we need private money, but the business environment is not conducive to attract private money, nor for public-private partnerships. And this includes private investment in agriculture and food systems. If we just look at the World Bank's Doing Business report, the recent one, which measures the enabling business environment in countries, you know, South Asian countries on average rank 118th in the world. East Asian and Pacific economies, and here we're including the rich countries in East Asia, they rank 96th on average. So it is fundamental, countries in Asia and Pacific, to adopt policies and incentives that improve business environment to attract private investment, including in agriculture and food system. Now this includes, you know, private investment in agriculture production, in logistics, transport, market intermediation, processing, food quality and safety, traceability, wholesale, retail, marketing, and so on. This is what's going to improve productivity, growth, and competitiveness of food systems. Third, previous panelists have said this already. Improving food systems require actions across the supply chain. You know, farmers need access to land, infrastructure, technology, knowledge, financing services, markets, value chains, digitalization. Other actors need the same. I mean, micro, small, and medium enterprises need access. Input suppliers, market intermediaries, processors, agribusinesses. Underpinning these actions is the importance of the proper economic valuation of natural capital. And I'm delighted that the previous UNEP speaker, Mr. Salman, brought this up. ADB, my own organization, is working on methodologies for economic valuation of natural capital, which is presently often unquantified, because we are convinced that one day this will be a variable within GDP calculation itself. As humanity destroys its natural capital, its value will be so much that it will be a key indicator within GDP. Right now, it's an indicator of GEP, growth ecosystem product. Of course, protection and sustainable use of natural resource-based climate adaptation across the supply chain. Now, post-COVID economic recovery provides a great opportunity to pursue green growth strategies through a combination of mitigation, adaptation, and climate finance. And my own organization has made a really big commitment in this to the tune of $80 billion by 2030 in cumulative terms, but we'll come to that later when we talk about commitments. And I'll be very short, I know time is out. From a regional perspective, there are opportunities for regional cooperation, integration, connectivity, trade across borders, trade in food systems, harmonizing food quality and safety standards, harmonizing, and the Olam speaker mentioned this, and I'm delighted to hear that, and mitigating cross-border risks. And my final point, and then I'll stop, is improving food systems, as we know, needs to be in a way that ensures inclusion and equity. And this goes back to what Mrs. Penunia was saying as the first speaker. You know, we need an inclusive approach covering all groups and leaving no one behind. Vulnerable groups, the poor, disadvantaged women, ethnic groups, indigenous people, the youth, all this participation of these groups needs to be actively and deliberately promoted and ensured. I will stop here. Thank you so much, and over to you.
Thank you very much. It is really encouraging to know that all the points that we have, that the earlier panelists have raised, are economically and fundable, you know, and more likely by priority that you have at the Asian Development Bank. So thank you for all those very good points and how the field of working together and the regional collaboration are very much a key to move forward. Thank you for all your good thoughts. It's very interesting to hear all those insights. Now, because of the time, I really would like to say that, you know, I have to say thank you for all the panelists. Just to give them their last word, I would like to come back to them again, but would like them to only do it in one, taking, if you have a choice, what top action you will prioritize for yourself and your organization to commit for the improvement of food system in the years to come. Just one, and please be brief. We are running out of time, but I want them to hear you. I want the audience to be able to be inspired by what you commit to do. So Jacqueline, start with you, please.
Okay, Amon, very quickly. ICRISAT commits to lead and participate, support broad game-changing thinking and collaborative research, regional collaborative research on new technologies with partner institutions and stakeholders, perhaps through a regional platform, a new regional platform, adding value to current ones so that we can have targeted technology dissemination and support with these game-changing technologies to create the resilient, sustainable food systems.
Great. Thank you very much. Ms. Penunia, please.
Yes, thank you. Family farmers are the heart and center of sustainable food systems, and we commit to promote family farming as a viable, noble, decent, meaningful livelihood within the framework of the UN Decade of Family Farming. APA has a vision, a mission, a strategic plan that we know aligns very well with promoting sustainable, equitable, just, and empowering food systems, and we look forward to partnerships and collective actions along our strategic plan and along the global action plan of the UN Decade of Family Farming. Hope countries can also implement national action plans for the Decade of Family Farming. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hossain, please, your choice.
Yes.
Your choice. Top
Yeah.
action.
As a consumer organization, CAP has been working to establish consumer rights in Bangladesh since its inception in 1978. We are also working on food safety issue for a long time. With the support of FAO, we have formed Bangladesh Food Safety Network, and we are organized several food safety campaign and consumer awareness program across the country. We are trying to develop safe food culture in country. We have also work on improving consumer awareness and food safety value chain in mango and tomato tomato processed product. And now we are implementing food safety governance in poultry sector with the support of FCDU, with the technical support of British Council. So we are trying to develop multi-stakeholder engagement with the government, private sector, CSO, and consumer in food sector so that food safety issue can ensure. We hope we will keep continue our work involving with all actors in food safety system in Bangladesh. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I come to Paul Nicholson, please.
Yeah.
What's your top? Yeah.
Perfect. So Olam's purpose is to reimagine global agri-systems. To do that, we need a couple of things. We need strong partnerships that help us bring innovations to the farmers who produce the high quality products that we rely on. We also need clarity on what advice to give and what metrics to use to ensure positive outcomes. Luckily for us, both of those are embraced, and Salam, thank you for mentioning it, in the Sustainable Rice platform. So Olam's advocacy and adherence to the Sustainable Rice platform has helped us to advance sustainability within our rice value chain. So our commitment to it, we're a founding member, and it was convened by some of the people here, the UN Environment, as well as ERI and GIZ, and FAO and WBCSD, as well as UN Women's have become members with over 106 members now, both public and private. We have a good mix of expertise to ensure that the farmers are getting the benefits, both on the natural capital side as well as the income side, and the consumer is getting clarity on the product that they're purchasing. So I would advocate strongly for SRP as a multilateral center point, even for regional transformation.
Wonderful. Thank you. So Mr. Hussain.
Thank you. The second Mr. Hussain. Just remind you, I'm from UNEP, and some may not be aware of this who are outside the UN system, but the Secretary General decided to appoint our Executive Director, Inga Anderson, as the chair of the UN Task Force. I think that's a really important role and an important decision. What that role requires is that we coordinate across the entire UN system. So with colleagues and friends from, say, for instance, Rome-based agencies. So our commitment in UNEP, speaking for UNEP, is to champion that, to coordinate, to make sure that environment and sustainability are key words for the Food Systems Summit, not only going up to September and the summit itself, but more importantly for the decade that follows in terms of action track, game-changing solution implementation. So that's where UNEP will contribute to make sure environment sustainability stays front and center. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Mr. Safar, you have the last word, and what are you going to invest on? And
Thank you.
you know, what's your top priority, please?
As an investing institution, we're happy for this question. ADB's commitment to improving food systems is articulated already. It's on our strategy 2030 for achieving prosperous, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable Asia and the Pacific. And out of 7 operational priorities, priority number 5 is focused on rural development and food systems. We commit to actions to promote access to infrastructure, technology, services, private sector investment, job creation, competitive food supply chains, and access to safe, nutritious, and affordable food. Now, in numerical terms, you know, we have a large portfolio across the region. We commit to ensuring that at least 75% of all our operations by 2030 focus on climate mitigation and adaptation efforts. So in one sentence, ADB commits to continuing to implement its strategy 2030 and supporting its developing member countries to scale up investment in inclusive, competitive, and climate resilient food systems. Thank you, and over.
Thank you very much. That's a very good ending and a good hope for people who is already that we heard here. They not only have good ideas, they would like to act, but they have to have resource and support. So here's some of the things that, and of course, if you would like to talk more to Mr. Safar about the priorities, I'm sure he would listen. And so thank you very much indeed. I would like to thank all the panelists for their insightful remarks. And I know that we have taken so much time. But from what I hear today, just a few words of keywords of what you have talked to us, and as a summary for this session, which I'm sure the Secretariat has already reported. So we did say that technology has a role to play. New innovation, technology, data, the alignment of policy, the importance of bringing the voices of those who matter, the farmers, the women, the consumer at the heart of this. We also hear that it is important to capitalize, to align policy better, to be able to share technology, to also bring some of these digital and also importantly, innovation that can be brought into many of the, from farm to table. So across board, we are hearing that. The best thing, I think we also hear the natural capital. That's really the heart of where we are, and it's Asia Pacific. And to know that it's economically viable, and also to know that the investment of the funding agency are also looking into supportive both the sustainability of the food system, but also to make sure that that is healthy for the consumers and also the community that we live in, the livelihood and the equity. So I think that those are some of the things that to me, I learned a lot, and thank you very much for this opportunity to learn from you. And thank you very much. For the audience, I am so sorry that we did not have time for questions, but I want to say a few things. Is that your voices matter, and that you can please write something in the chat box and share, and they will be collected and summarized by the organizers. The idea that we're looking from you is also, what do you see as the game changing and priority action? This is it. This is what needs to be done. And at the regional scale, that we can do this together. So with that, I will turn the floor over to the organizer And thank you very much for this opportunity again. Katinka, you have turned the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Imran, for facilitating this engaged discussion, also for your summary. And thank you also to the panelists, firstly for sharing your views, but also for, of course, sharing your commitments. And we look very much forward to working together with you in the future to see this come to fruition. We are coming to the end of the dialogue and will now proceed with the closing session. And it is my pleasure to invite our first speaker in the closing, Mr. John Eiliff, who's the World Food Programme Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific. Over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Katinka. Thank you very much indeed. What a pleasure it is to be with you here today. Thank you for this opportunity. I extend my thanks to our hosts, to our gifted moderators, and to all of our extremely inspiring speakers today, colleagues and friends who joined us. This really has been a truly remarkable event. We knew coming into this discussion that the Asia-Pacific region needs to think differently about food systems. Our region has been growing in its prosperity at an unprecedented rate, and yet 2 billion of its people still cannot afford a healthy diet. Our region hosts half of the world's undernourished population and half the world's malnourished people. Micronutrient deficiencies are widespread, and as has been said today, obesity is on the rise. So in spite of that immense progress made over the years, it seems clear that today's food systems are in some way failing the region's poorest people. And that's come through very clearly for me today. The COVID pandemic, of course, struck with unprecedented magnitude and severity, but it's taught us something vital. It's shown us that our food systems, the economies which drive them, and the social protection systems which shelter our poor from adversity are not well equipped to withstand shocks. COVID is therefore a wake-up call for us all. As David Nabarro said earlier, it's focused our minds. It is urging us to build more equitable and more resilient food systems. What this all means is that there's no better time than now for us to be examining our food systems, proudly taking stock of the remarkable progress which countries across the Asia-Pacific region have made in the last few decades, but working also with determination to shape national pathways towards healthier, more resilient and equitable food systems by 2030. What I've heard today from representatives of the countries and the other inspiring speakers we had in that last session is an immense commitment and a genuine passion to reshape and enhance national and regional food systems, to make them work for the benefit of local economies, but more importantly, perhaps, to make them work for the benefit of the poor. I personally come away from today re-energized, full of inspiration, and above all, full of admiration for all the work that's going on across the region. Having heard our speakers today, I'm struck with so many thoughts, but with your kind indulgence and in the interests of time, of course, allow me to share only two with you. The first is that including vulnerable people in national dialogues is not optional. It is absolutely critical. Their perspectives and challenges need to be heard, and they must be part of the process of finding solutions and identifying pathways towards sustainable food systems. It's been really uplifting today to hear that so many of your dialogues are engaging the vulnerable already. The second thought is this: the Global Summit is an immense opportunity, obviously. The regional thinking, as Dr. Nabarro said, is fundamentally important. But in my personal view, the real power and the real opportunity lies at the national level, as you set your national vision, clarify and agree on expectations and plans for the coming decade, and begin to implement. The UN system, including WFP as convener of Track 5 on building resilience to vulnerabilities, shocks and stress, is there to offer its full support. But ultimately, the power of the pathways is that they are national, owned in each country by governments, by civil society, and by the many poor consumers which our national food systems serve. Excellencies, distinguished participants, and dear colleagues, affordable, accessible, safe, and nutritious food for all is more than a commodity. It's an absolute necessity, a requirement for our society so that we can withstand the increased number of climate, conflict, health, and other crises that today are clearly outstripping our ability to cope. WFP joins your commitment to leaving no one behind, and we are confident, having heard you today especially, that the UN Food Systems Summit will be a turning point in the world's journey to achieving the SDGs by 2030. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Back to you, Katinka.
Thank you so much for these very thoughtful words, John. Our next speaker will deliver her remarks through video. Can we please have the statement of Dr. Poonam Ketrapal Singh, the Regional Director of WHO Regional Office for Southeast Asia.
Warm greetings to all and a great appreciation for your efforts. At the outset, I would like to thank the UN ESCAP Asia and the Pacific for taking a lead role in convening this dialogue in coordination with other UN partners. As your discussions have highlighted, sustainable food systems are at the heart of sustainable development. They are critical to achieving Sustainable Development Goal 2 on hunger and SDG 3 on health and well-being for all. But as with health, building food systems that are sustainable and which work for the benefit of all will positively impact all areas of development, from ending poverty to increasing access to safe and clean water and reducing greenhouse emissions. I welcome the intense global attention that food systems are receiving in the lead up to the first UN Food Systems Summit. As you have expressed, the summit will provide a global platform for high-level political commitment and concrete actions towards food system transformation, enabling the consumption of diets that are healthier, safer, and more nature-friendly, economically equitable, and socially just. The COVID-19 pandemic has radically exacerbated the world's ongoing food security and nutrition crisis, causing economic and social systems shocks, disruptions in food supply, and issues with food safety. As the anchor agency for Action Track 2, WHO recognizes the need for stakeholders to facilitate a transition towards diets that are more nutritious and which require fewer resources to produce and transport while minimizing food waste. As you have noted, dietary risk factors cause 11 million premature deaths globally every year, many of them in the Asia-Pacific region. While hunger and undernutrition persist, diet-related health conditions such as obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, and cancer are rising. Communities increasingly face a double burden of malnutrition, where both undernutrition and overweight obesity are prevalent. Current food policies, food industry practices, and shifting consumer preferences are driving overconsumption and dramatic growth in consumption of highly processed foods and beverages. WHO continues to support member states in Asia, the Pacific, and beyond to implement high-impact interventions that encourage the consumption of healthy foods and beverages, for example, by restricting marketing, especially to children, enhancing access to nutritional information through labeling, and applying fiscal nudges. WHO continues to support member states in other key areas of action, for example, by working across sectors to implement Codex standards and enhance food safety, and by applying a One Health approach to what is one of the 21st century's greatest threats to health and development, which is antimicrobial resistance. I am pleased that this dialogue has consolidated regional views, perspectives, and experiences, and will chart the path forward towards the Food Systems Summit. We have gained insights from national dialogues covering each of the 5 action tracks, providing direction to stakeholders and development platforms to support member states in each of the cross-cutting areas. First, strengthening urban agriculture and nutrition. Second, enhancing local food production and short value chains, which improve access to nutritious foods. Third, leveraging social protection systems to enhance food security and nutrition outcomes. And fourth, upgrading surveillance systems to monitor nutrition and food security. WHO and partner UN agencies, as well as other regional bodies in Asia and the Pacific, stand ready to support member states to implement your recommendations. In addition to anchoring action track 2, WHO will continue to liaise with all other action tracks, and I look forward to our ongoing collaboration. Together, we must drive transformative change to build a world in which healthy, sustainable, and inclusive food systems allow both people and planet to thrive. Thank you.
We thank our speaker from the WHO regional office, who unfortunately could not be here today in person. And now I would like to hand over to our last, but by no means last speaker, Detchen Tsering, the regional director and representative for Asia and the Pacific. Detchen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Katinka. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank all the panelists, country representatives, participants from diverse multidisciplinary backgrounds across Asia and the Pacific and the world for a very fruitful dialogue on food systems in the region. Today, we've heard messages and experiences from the national dialogues, priority areas identified, as well as discussed opportunities for regional action that will contribute towards transforming the food systems towards sustainability. These valuable messages and recommendations for action were not only inspiring, but are an important contribution to the Food Systems Summit to be held later this year. Regional dialogues are a key part of the summit dialogue process, bearing in mind that the summit is seen as a point of departure to utilize the food systems approach as a key cross-cutting theme to accelerate action to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. The results of these dialogues will help shape activities and action tracks, as well as the UN Secretary General statement for the Global Summit. And if we think about unsustainable consumption and production, particularly related to agriculture and food, this is accelerating environmental change, and the impacts are falling disproportionately on already vulnerable communities. Particularly the livelihoods of women and disadvantaged groups are severely affected as they are heavily dependent on biodiversity and natural resources and have limited choices and opportunities. Sustainable food systems are central for action to tackle the 3 interconnected planetary crises: climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. In order to prevent and reverse the worst impacts of environmental decline, ambitious and coordinated action by governments, businesses, and people around the world are needed to rapidly transform key systems, including food systems, so that our use of land and oceans becomes sustainable. To this end, the UN Secretary General has identified making peace with nature as a defining task of the 21st century and has called for collective action to radically change the way we produce, process, and consume food. This shift is an essential component of addressing the planetary crises of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution, as well as the impacts of COVID-19 and associated economic shocks. We have an unprecedented opportunity to transform our food systems towards sustainability, as well as transform humanity's relationship with nature and build back better. We need to promote nature-positive actions for sustainable food systems. This is one of the main themes that will be discussed at the upcoming Forum of Ministers and Environment Authorities of Asia Pacific. This forum will be a platform for member states and stakeholders to contribute regional perspectives to the resumed session of the 5th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly to be held early next year. Another important global milestone will be the upcoming Convention on Biological Diversity, the 15th Conference of Parties in Kunming. This will set the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, which will be essential for a sustainable shared future and ensuring the vision of living in harmony with nature. Sustainable food systems will be fundamental for the just launched UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration 2021 to 2030 as a key cross-cutting theme to accelerate action to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as prevent, halt, and reverse environmental degradation. We all have a role to play to truly become the generation restoration. All these important milestones underline that there is a growing political momentum for ensuring a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, and likewise food systems. And we need to harness this growing political ambition to put into actual commitments at all levels, national, regional, and global. UNEP will continue to work closely with our partner UN agencies. We will continue to support and contribute to these efforts as one of the lead institutions in preparing for the Food Systems Summit and its follow-up. To conclude, once again, I would like to offer my sincere thanks to all of you for your inspiring discussions, and we look forward to taking the lessons and findings learned together to turn it into political commitments, tangible actions, and results. I thank you.
Thank you so much, also, Dechen, for your inspiring words. This ends our Asia-Pacific Regional Food Systems Dialogue. I would like to thank all of our speakers, our moderators, panelists, participants, for your very active engagement, for the excellent interventions, and also for staying with us a little bit longer than planned. As had been mentioned by several speakers, we will reflect the major outcomes in a report, which will be submitted to the pre-summit. And in this report, we will also reflect comments and questions that had been submitted through the chat function, including through the YouTube function. As we come to the end, we would like to ask you to stay with us for just another couple of minutes to take another short survey with all participants, and would ask you to log back into menti.com with the link which is being provided in the chat function. For firstly, the question, what action areas deserve greater attention to achieve our goal of equitable and sustainable food systems for all people in Asia and the Pacific? And again, this is being set up as a word cloud. You will have 3 choices, 3 answer options. Please go ahead and clock your responses. We have about a minute for this. Which action areas deserve greater attention to achieve our goal of equitable and sustainable food systems for all people in Asia and the Pacific, after having listened to our 2 eminent panels and our speakers in the opening and in the closing? Great, we see the first responses coming in. We see coordination, the need for coordinated responses and regional agreements, health considerations, private and sector mechanization, urban agriculture, governance, food safety and nutrition considerations, the welfare of farmers, and risk management. We will keep this open for another 10 seconds or so. So if you would like to add your thoughts, please go ahead. We now see agroecology in the center and governance as well as climate. With this, I think we can close this survey. I would like to ask my colleagues to take this off the screen. And our last and final question is, after having listened to the dialogue, after having listened to the interventions of our panelists and our speakers, how optimistic are you now that our region will achieve an equitable and sustainable food system transformation for all people? Again, the score is from 1, very pessimistic, to 6, very optimistic. And we would like to see whether there's been a change to the temperature check that we did at the beginning of the dialogue this afternoon. We still have some responses coming in, but I think it's already fair to say that the speakers have inspired our participants. Clearly, there is more optimism in the room than it was at the beginning of the dialogue. So I wish to thank all of you for that, and hereby declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much. Stay safe.